The question becomes, I guess the largest question here is what happened when Jews returned in 45. And here what you did in a short script is to give the sense of how overwhelming to Hungarian society their return was, and how dangerous it was because of what had happened during the war. In fact, during the war they call it an interesting thing, which is during occupation people had different modalities of being corrupted. And what you showed, I thought, brilliantly, is the way in which everybody had a hidden story. And the return of the Jews aired the forbidden stories that had been repressed. What motivated you to make the film?
Yeah, so it's based on a short story. My friend Gábor T. Santo wrote this story, and when I read this story 2004, I'm totally changed my world, because this absolutely new topic and a new unique point of view about this age or that summer. So it's a missing chain in our history. All the time the historic books and in the class until 45, the fascist period, and after start the communist period from 48. So and between something, that's why we're looking for this missing chain. What's happened after the war. And we want to show in this model situation the reaction of the Hungarian society, especially a village society, for this. It's not only the survivors' attitude. So, and we combined, that was the developing of the script, we combined these parallel galaxies, and we showed a different way to when we're filming, yeah.
The other thing you did very beautifully, I thought, was the smallness of detail. One of the marks of great European films is that they get the smallest of details right, and the smallest of details reach very far. There's a great historian of the Holocaust by the name of Raoul Hilberg, who said, "I never asked a large question. The reason I never asked a large question is I was afraid I'd get a small answer. And I always asked a small question, and what he didn't say is when you ask a small question, you get a large answer." And I think this is a film that does that with all the smallest of details. What I asked you about the film, though, is that Hungary is one of the societies today which is now trying to rewrite again the Jewish memory and the Hungarian memory, and trying to do it in such a way that it forgets the role of Hungarians in the process of the destruction. And the question I meant by could you do it again is how would let me ask it this way. How was the film received in Hungary?
So the premiere was in Hungary in April. After the Berlinale, we, with a lot of international review and prizes, we start the release because we are afraid from the reactions. But it was really good. So the critical and the audience also loved the movie, and so this Hungary, I think, is not what you know about the news. So my audience in Hungary, this 40,000 people, is so city life, liberal people who so not, I don't want to talk about politics, but so Hungary also is not a black and white.
We also in America are not very happy to talk about politics.
Yeah, I agree.
Not very proud to talk about politics.
For me too. So it's not really comfortable talking about the Hungarian politics, and it's a really shamey situation. But of course, two things important. When we start this story in 2000 and 2004, is the climate in Hungary was changed because the neo-Nazi parties, this Jobbik came out, and the young 20 years old lawyers, and we afraid, and okay, the communism was horrible, but doesn't exist anti-Semitism, and doesn't exist like open gangs, you know, so, okay. And also important, the Hungarian memorial politics, sometimes this is an example in the Freedom Square in Budapest, and 10 years ago made a sculpture with a big Nazi eagle, and Hungary is a victim or an innocent virgin who afraid from the eagle, you know. So and we want to so we don't accept this thinking about, because it's not true, so it's so simple, and we want to tell something closer to true. So of course it's a fiction movie, it's a fiction village, but we had thousands and thousands stories about that period for similar like this, and sometimes it's much more aggressive and you know, bloody situation, and so
Elie Wiesel, who was deported as a Hungarian Jew, was actually a Romanian Jew, once said that some things happen but they're not true, and some things are not, and some things are true but they didn't quite happen.
yeah.
And this is an example of something that is profoundly true but didn't quite happen. Okay, the question is that normally when you go to a Holocaust movie you feel sad, and this did not convey that feeling to you. Let me suggest one thing. This did not deal with the Holocaust, but with how you dealt in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And
well, I would disagree with
it did in part, but it also only exposed what happened during the Holocaust by showing the aftermath of it. And it also showed the question for the two Jews of what you do to confront and to deal with your memories. And they were seeking a certain type of closure, which is a different story. This is the after, which is a very complex after. But your feelings?
So I think it's an emotional story, and there's a human story, and of course I'm a filmmaker. I don't know it's touchy or not, but I feel from the audience it's so it's emotional, and a lot of people crying, and a lot of people thinking, and so I don't know. I have no answer. This I've got a different position. So
Okay, let's take two questions and then we'll take them by the twos just to get more. The gentleman with the blue shirt, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Could you explain a little more clearly what the relationship between Yancy, the Russian soldiers, and the woman who burned the drugstore was? You were saying something, but I'm not clear what it was.
the Yanchi is a Hungarian soldier, was in the front and came back to the village. And the previous love of her is a wedding day with the son of the clerk. So, but Yanchi was the previous love of this, but everybody think he died in the front or in the war. And of course, he's came from the Russian front, and he speaks in Russian, and got a good relationship with the new Russian guys who in the station and all over the village. So in the occupation started in April. The Russian arrived to Hungary, and in that time, in August, they were in the countries. So it's really important. If you want to somebody to a new career in that time, you need a good relationship with Russians.
There's a term in the history of this, which is called double occupation. And double occupation very often leads to double collaboration. And you show your loyalty to the new occupier
That's
by
right.
going against the last occupier. And in respect to what happened to the Jews, that meant that where the people had cooperated with the Soviet occupation, they were the first to cooperate in lands that were later occupied by the Germans. They were the first to collaborate with the Germans. They showed their loyalty to the Germans by attacking the Jews. Not in Hungary. In Hungary, you had the German collaboration, the Nazi collaboration, and then you showed your loyalty by all of a sudden turning against that and going with the Soviet occupation. And remember that the Hungarians had been allies of Germany all the way through and had fought against the Soviet Union in the Soviet Union. Did you show this film in rural villages or just in major cities?
Just major cities, because in the villages no cinemas. So in the neck, absolutely, the countryside is Hungary is doesn't exist culturally. So maybe Debrecen or Miskolc, but that's all. In these cities really less the intellectual people. So Hungary means Budapest. So is.
Where did you hire the actors from? They were amazing. I mean, you really captured the.
Where did you hire the actors from? And
The actors really professional theater actors. Mostly the main actor Peter Rudolph is a famous comedian in Hungary. So it's the first real dramatic negative role of him, and he's plus 15 kilograms and bald and mustache, so absolutely changed the character of. And the two Jews are not professional actors, but the older is a dancer, and the younger is a photographer, but they has no dialogue. So
The extras, you know, the extras like.
I am tempted to say that could have fooled me. Yes. Could this film be applicable to what happened in the post-war Poland? And the answer again to that is, in many of the small towns there was a hidden history. In many of the small towns, and remember, Poland, let me put it to you this way. There were areas in which Jews were killed Poland was divided in sections in terms of murders. The major story in Poland was ghettoization to deportation to death camps. But there were a whole range of Polish villages and cities and towns and hamlets in which the Jews were killed close to home. There were also instances in which the question became, do we kill our own Jews and then inherit their property? In Hebrew there was an accusation, haratzachta v'gam yarashta, did you murder and also inherit? And there are a series of Polish villages, Jedwabne is the most famous, in which they murdered their own Jews to inherit, but the Jews that they murdered were not strangers. In other words, the Jews they murdered were their pharmacists, were their doctors, were their cleaners, were their mill owners, were the people who worked in the bakery, and the whole range of things. And part of what you saw is the way in which the village was complicit, and the few who offered a rescue, the multitude that benefited. And there were two forms historically, if you give a historical lecture for one more point, there were two forms of property. There was mobile property that could be taken by the German occupiers, either for themselves or for the Reich. And there was immobile property that had a series of heirs, a series of people who wanted to take possession of it. And in all of these villages, lots of people had immobile property that people took advantage of. You moved into somebody else's home. You took over somebody else's business. Let's assume you had a cleaning place. You took over the equipment for the cleaning. You took over the equipment for the printing. This is not stuff that could be moved out easily. If you had a mill, every town needed a mill for the grinding of wheat. I mean, you have a whole range of things. Bakeries have ovens. You can't take the ovens out of, sometimes you can't take the ovens out. So lots of people took possession of these properties. Lots of people had hidden stories. And when they took possession, they presumed the Jews were not coming back. Because you behave differently if you're borrowing a home than if you're keeping one. And what did the people know? They knew for certain, or almost certain, that the Jews were not coming back. And that's what made the return so profoundly dangerous. Let's take 2 questions over there, 1 question here.
I'm curious about whether the story was exactly the way it was portrayed in the film, because I expect a lot of prejudice, and there was prejudice, but the other part of it was the fear, the paranoia, the idea that they didn't know exactly what these 2 Orthodox Jews were going to end up doing.
Yeah,
And
it
the
was-
scene at the cemetery with the crowd there, and then the town clerk, everybody sort of the center of the universe was around the town clerk. I was wondering how much of this was exact to the story as opposed to what you added as the director of the film.
Neil, about the short story now, Menemsha.
Anybody interested in reading the short story, 10 pages translated into English, can send a note via our website, menemshafilms.com, and we'll send it right back to you. So you'll see the short story, which became the basis of a lengthy screenplay. You'll see the
So,
difference in how-
but the question, so the answer, it was only 10 pages, but the story was the same. The 2 Orthodox Jews arrived, and it was a misunderstanding. The idea of the novel is a misunderstanding of the village people, and they think they want something, and they didn't. So that was the basic of the script.
Freud would say projection.
Yeah, paranoia or something like that.
Let's take the last question, ma'am, behind.
In view of the current political climate in Hungary, has the government made any comment about your film?
Has the government made any comment about your film in view of the current political climate?
I think in no bad comments from the government. I think for my Hungarian government, every Hungarian success in abroad is good, especially in this topic, because we got a really bad reputation all over the world because this migration fence and that kind of stuff. But I think our government takes gestures and support these stories, so I have no really bad opinion about them. So
We have
Sorry.
to call it because they have another screening. But let's conclude by saying thank you to the director and much appreciation for a wonderful film.